We will be amazed before we are halfway through. And you can say, well, wait a second now. Halfway through, we're at the 9th step. What does that mean? It's simple. We just found it out. You go back to page 75, you're at the 5th step, and what do you find? Some of these same promises are already coming true. Go back to 3rd step. They're already marinating all the way back there. See what that means? Be amazed before we're halfway through. There are many people after 5th step would basically have realized most of these promises. Now, freedom is a word which is bandied about quite a bit in the big book. Remember in chapter 9, the chapter of the family, tells us that it is God's will for us that we be happy, joyous, and free. And the 3rd step, we ask God for freedom from the bondage of self. Freedom crops up all along the way. What does it mean? Freedom from what? Well, it seems pretty clear, although the big book certainly doesn't spell this out. It seems pretty clear that freedom does not mean license. It means freedom from self. And that it is through freedom from self that we open the doors and allow God in. And we stay out of self, and we stay out of self-will, and we continue to function based upon what we perceive to be God's will for us, and we seek from Him the power to be obedient to that will. So we're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. Now there's an interesting squib in As Bill Sees It. If you're taking notes, it's on page 317, in which Bill is talking there about vision, having vision. So the past is very important to us. We don't shut the door on it. Those who do shut the door on their past don't recover. Those are the people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. And when we are incapable or unwilling to look at our past, we don't recover. Going on, we will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. Isn't that an interesting way to put it? To comprehend the word serenity. You ever wonder what in the world that means? I'm not sure. Perhaps comprehend there means understand. And we get understanding when we have had experience. Remember Henry Ford's imprimatur that when we hear it, we're interested. When we see it, we believe it. When we experience it, we understand it. Maybe that's what it's saying here. That we will have come to understand the word serenity because we have experienced it. And I'm pretty sure that's what they're getting at. I'm not sure Bill even knew what he was doing when he wrote that, but nevertheless it came out okay if we think it through. And we will know peace. So that gives us a clue that something's happened here. We have experienced both serenity and peace. So if we use the word comprehend to mean know or understand, then it fits right into that sentence. I don't know if I'm making too big a deal out of that. I don't know whether anybody else here is interested in these kind of semantics, but I am. The big book is absolutely filled with these kinds of things, and it's really important to parse the sentences and think the words through and try to figure out what they actually mean. The most dense piece of writing I've ever tried to read. No matter how far down the scale we've gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. Well, sometimes you might even turn that around and say the further down the scale we've gone, the more our experience can benefit others. Reminds me of I thought for a while it was a joke. I went to a meeting down in North Miami and there was a speaker there. It was absolutely incredible. Incredible. He was trying to prove that he wasn't an alcoholic, and yet he was trying to be accepted as being an alcoholic. And he tried to figure that one out. He wanted to. He said he'd been around for 4.5 years. I'm digressing here, but I thought this was kind of interesting because here's a guy that claims he's had about 20 years of psychiatric treatment. And just before he got sober, he went to another new psychiatrist who gave him some kind of medicine, some medication. He mentioned the name, I can't remember it. And this psychiatrist said, now, this is going to take about 2 months before this really works. So we're going to start you out with 75 milligrams, and then we'll go to 100, then 500, and eventually we'll get you up to 800 milligrams. That'll be a couple months. He said, but you know what happened? I took 75 milligrams, and I didn't want to drink anymore. And he said, my drinking fell off by 75%. I was only drinking 25% as much as I drank before I took this medicine. And there were a whole bunch of newcomers there. And I could see them saying, yeah, well, what is this stuff? God, no steps, no God, no meetings, just give me the medicine. Can anybody here identify with, I guess maybe you can if you're not an alcoholic. If you're an alcoholic, that doesn't make any sense at all. Now then, let's see. We get to see how our experience can benefit others, and of course that's the nexus of the whole program, isn't it? One of the things that we're doing as we examine ourselves is preparing ourselves to pass on to the next person exactly what we found about ourselves so that they can identify with that, and perhaps that will help them to go on with their own recovery. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We were talking before the meeting too about this, the way we define ourselves. And you know, when people come in that door, quite often the definition they have of themselves is really poor. Really, really poor. Losers, no willpower, bad people, scum of the earth. Sometimes the definition is worse than others, but in almost every case it's a negative definition. And it's the way we see ourselves, not the way we present ourselves, but the way deep down inside we see ourselves. And there's this sense of uselessness. But perhaps the most difficult of all these things is self-pity. I think of all the manifestations of self-pity is the worst. I'll tell you why. It's just my opinion, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Not only does it destroy us, but it destroys our relationships with others. After a while, self-pity just rubs raw, and pretty soon we find people shunning us and avoiding us because they don't want to hear it anymore. And there's an awful lot of that self-pity still going around in these rooms, you know. It seems as though people are not being taught just how damaging that is. Just how destructive it is to us, because it's a powerful manifestation of self, which self is something we've got to get away from, but it also continues to destroy relationships. And of course, when we look back, you know, if you do your fourth and fifth step, you find that most of your history is a history of your interrelationships with other people and the failures of those relationships, whether it be in the family or in love relationships or at school or in work or whatever. So that self-pity is a monster. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Now, when we get to the 11-step inventory, we're going to be looking at that again, because every night before we go to sleep, we look back to see if that's true. That we've lost interest in selfish things and we've gained a lot of interest in our fellows. Are we really seeing what we can put into the stream of life, or are we living still in the throes of our selfish needs, wants, and desires. And every night we get a chance to look at that. And that tells us a great deal about our spiritual fitness. Self-seeking will slip away. Notice the emphasis on self here. And that's to be expected. Go back to what we learned back there in the third step. That selfishness and self-centeredness, that's the root of our trouble. That our troubles are our own making. That they arise out of ourselves. And that the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. And then it goes on to tell us we have to be rid of this selfishness. We have to, or it kills us. That's pretty serious stuff. So when we look here in the promises, we find that the release from self and the bondage of self is that freedom which we hear about. I believe that's to be true. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Now there is the rebirth. We were reborn. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. The rebirth that the Big Book speaks of is not coexistent with the rebirth in a religious sense. For many of us, the two things are coexistent, but not in the Big Book. The Big Book is talking about a rebirth of thinking, a complete change in our attitude and our outlook on life. And here it tells us that will all change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. Well, see, we already know that, don't we? We just read about it back in the fifth step. Our fears fall from us. And the growth of faith is very quickly now canceling out fear. Being intuitively knowing how to handle situations. See, a couple pages further on, the Big Book's going to tell us that we have developed this vital sixth sense, which of course is a relationship with God, the ability to be inspired, to receive intuitive thoughts, and to know what He expects of us and what we are to do. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Well, Lordy, that can start all the way back in the first step, can't it? I've heard lots of people testify to that. Second step, third step, we really begin to wake up. In fact, Bill remarked on this, and he said that he learned he had to pray just as if there were a God, and then when the miracles started coming and he could no longer deny that they came from a power greater than himself, he said, that's when faith came. So this stuff's been happening for a long time. We're seeing more and more evidence that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. Now this next sentence is going to be anathema to those who want the easier, softer way, but so be it. That's just tough. Because here's the truth. They will always materialize if we work for them. This is also anathema to those who like to follow the credo that somehow or another our progress through the steps and through spiritual growth is one of these slowly evolving things where we're constantly going to be bedeviled by defects and insanities. We're going to have to work on them. We're going to have to keep God boxes. We're going to have to keep defect boxes over here. And we're going to have to drive the speed limit and brush our teeth with our left hand and call our sponsor 6 times a day. Balderdash. They will always materialize. All of them. The whole thing. Just what we read. Will always materialize if we're willing to do the work for it. That does not brook of any equivocation. There are no weasel words there. It does not say, oh, by golly, gee whiz, some of these, or maybe even most of them, will sometimes happen if you just get out there and do a little bit of work. They means all of them will always, what part of always don't we understand? Materialize if we work for them. And that's the truth. There's nothing phony here, nothing made up. Remember that what we're reading is the history, the experience of those who wrote the book. And if you wonder if they're pulling your leg or exaggerating, remember what Dr. Silkworth said in his letter that precedes his opinion. He said you can believe everything they say about themselves. Wouldn't you like to have that for your epitaph? He saw these men as men of integrity. He had intimately been involved with them for 3.5 years. He had written his opinion letter, and he had been in on the writing of this book from the very beginning. You can absolutely rely, he said, upon what they say about themselves. And that's what they're saying to us right here. They're saying, this is what happened to us, and we know that if you work for it, these promises will always come true in your life as well. It's a pretty great promise, and it's the truth. Now, before we read the 10th step, we need to understand a little bit of the history of the 10th step. Let's go back in our books to page 13 just for a moment. Now remember, this is where we find Bill in the hospital for the last time. And while he was in the hospital for the last time, he worked certain steps, which were brought to him by Evie. And as we go through these 3 paragraphs, the second, third, and fourth full paragraphs on page 13, we will find that Bill had worked the first 2 steps before he got in the hospital. We'll find 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 on page 13. On page 14, we'll find the 12th step. The last full paragraph. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might help work with others. So there is one glaring omission, and that's the 10th step. We don't find it here, and that's because there was no such step at that time with the Oxfordians. Even by inference, they didn't have anything like that, and there was a reason for that. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. 2, we got honest with ourselves. 3, we got honest with another person in confidence. 4, we made amends for harms done others. 5, we worked with other alcoholics without demand for prestige or money. And 6, we prayed to God to help us do these things as best we could. You notice there's no 10th step there. Now, what was wrong with the OG's theory, at least for our people, was they found that having worked these 6 steps, they did not achieve anything like perfection, nor did they achieve anything approaching absolutism. To the contrary, they found that the world and all of its people would continue to threaten them. And by the time Big Book was being written, they pretty well understood that fear was the progenitor of all of their defects. And as a matter of fact, it also lay behind their guilt. They had come to understand that fear was their enemy, perhaps their only enemy. As Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. They pretty much had come to understand that. Now, it's quite obvious that if there are threats out there which are of a continuing nature, this means that fear is something which would continue to crop up, with the consequence that resentments would crop up, that dishonesty would crop up, and that selfishness and self-centeredness would crop up, because these are all products of fear. So what they saw was that they were going to have a way to deal with this. Since they had not been released from these things by virtue of the Oxford Group 6 steps, they began to develop a practice which would allow them on a daily basis to deal with the products of fear. That is, selfishness, dishonesty, and resentment, and fear, and guilt, and remorse, and shame. And the way to do that, then, as they, by trial and error, they went along, they said, well, wait just a minute here, we don't have to have anything new, because we've already got everything we need. We've got the 4-step inventory. We've got the 5th step where we admit what we find in our inventory. We have the 7th step where we ask God for help to be freed from this. And we have the 9th step where we make amends if we've harmed somebody. And now we also have the 12th step, which means that we know, and we've already found out, that if we want to be completely free of this stuff, we need to turn our thoughts to somebody we can help. So out of trial and error and the fact that these steps were available to them, they were already there, they were in place, they knew how to work them. They knew that if they used these steps that they would be given relief. In other words, the simple kit of spiritual tools was right there for them. So they said, in effect, I don't know if anybody actually sat down and worked this all out at one time, maybe not. But the Oxford 6 steps didn't work. They needed some way to, on a daily basis, correct these things that would crop up as a result of the threats of the world and its people. And so out of this grew the 10th step. Word of mouth, trial and error. Now, it was not written down until 1939, when Bill was writing chapter 5. Never been written down before. He writes, at length I began to write on a cheap yellow tablet. I split the word-of-mouth program up into smaller pieces, meanwhile enlarging its scope considerably. Uninspired as I felt, I was surprised in a short time, perhaps a half hour. I had set down certain principles which, on being counted, turned out to be 12 in number. And for some unaccountable reason, I had moved the idea of God into the 2nd step, right up front. Besides, I had named God very liberally throughout the other steps. So we can see here that Bill is telling us when he sat down to write out the steps, and by the way, what eventuated from that was the 200 words which are changing the world right now. Those things which have made it possible for you and me to continue to live. Now then, there's no big surprise here then that certain things are coming true, and stop and think what's happened now. So let's see what this says. Bottom of page 83, last partial paragraph. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, and that doesn't mean if we sat around and worried about it. It means taking painstaking action, following directions carefully. A couple of pages more, the big book is going to say, if we have carefully followed directions, certain things will have happened. We vigorously commenced this way of living. Mark the word as. Very important in this sentence. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We talked about this before when we were looking at the ninth step, but let's repeat it. The word as there means precisely that we do not necessarily have to complete our ninth step before we begin working 10, 11, and 12. And that makes sense when you think about it, because there may be some amends we can never finish or never make. So if we were to wait until all of our amends were made before we begin to work the 10th step, we might never get to it. Remember that the 9th step has the escape clause in it called what? Does anybody remember?
Except where we may do harm to others.
Willingness. If I am in fact willing to make amends, though I am not able to right now, I still will be set free from the guilt, remember? And so this word as means that as we are working on our 9th step to clean up the past, we will then go to our 10th and 11th and 12th steps. We are not to delay. That's what that means. As we cleaned up the past. We have entered the world of the Spirit. Here's the first of the great, not promises, but the revelation of events which have transpired and have now culminated for us because we have done the first 9 steps. We have entered the world of the Spirit. Go back to the 4th step. What did we learn back there? That because of our resentments, we were blocked off from the sunlight of the Spirit. We learned that it was necessary for us to find and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Now we find that that has occurred. Not part of it, not some of it. Not some practical joke by God. He only gives you some relief as you go along. Just never say never. It's okay to put limitations on God's power, as long as you do it kind of sneeringly or snidely. Of course, we all know, don't we? No, we don't. One thing we do know for sure, whenever we human beings put limitations on God's power, we limit ourselves and our ability to accept His power in our life. That's what happens. So we have entered the world of the Spirit. No equivocation there. So our next function is to grow in understanding of effectiveness, and this is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. If you knew, take it to heart. It means exactly what it says. Nothing happens here overnight. And even if it did, it wouldn't matter. If you should happen to have an epiphany, a bright light experience, burning bush experience, that's not the end all any more than it would be if you had a growth of spiritual experience over a long period of time. Because from now on, for the rest of your life, you are going to be growing and continuing to grow spiritually, and you're going to be continuing to carry God's message. It's not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. And for those of us who don't understand that, we have to remember that we're dealing here with a matter of, in its truest essence, man versus God. Humankind versus God. Because we human beings are just naturally self-centered. We're naturally self-centered. It seems to be the way we're born, the way we exist. Think about yourself. If you get the input of any kind of data that comes to you, what do you do with it? Don't you first sort it out to see how it affects you? Whether it's good for you or bad for you, or whether you can safely ignore it? And does it go any further? Probably not. That's why we have all these tools that the Big Book gives us to stay in a state of surrender, to stay out of self, freedom from the bondage of self. It was a major deal. And so when we look at it from that standpoint, the fact that we have arrived at this point right now, that we've entered the world of the Spirit, and there are other great things that have happened, does this mean that we're through? That we're going to now be able to coast on this? We're going to be able to put this in the bank and just watch it grow interest? No. The truth of the matter is that we must be willing to work on our spiritual fitness every day. There are no vacations in AA. There are no days off. If you've been on a cruise ship lately, you'll know what I mean. The friends of Bill Wilson, Bill W. are all over the place. Every cruise ship has friends of Bill W. And people who don't know who we are can't imagine why these friends are constantly traveling on every ship they go on. Now, how in the world, can you imagine you're sitting on death row and the governor says, now look, if you just do these things every day, I'm going to commute your death sentence. In fact, I'm even going to consider giving you a reprieve. And you say, I'm sorry, Gov, I gotta get a life. You're asking me to become a junkie here. You mean I gotta do these things every day? I don't think so. You know, some of us are like this heart patient. Doc would know about this. And he recovers from a big heart attack and a couple of operations, and his doctor gives him all the stuff he's supposed to do and the stuff he's not supposed to do. And for a long time he goes along with this. But he's feeling pretty good, and one day he goes up some stairs he's not supposed to go up, and he also has a big cigar and a couple of snifters of brandy, which he's not supposed to do, but he gets away with it. So pretty soon he starts getting away with all the stuff, and the next thing he knows, boom. Good night, Charlie. You say, well, this guy's got to be nuts. He went through all this over here, and the doctor laid it out for him. Here's what you must do if you wish to live. Sooner or later, most of that stuff goes by the boards, and the same thing happens in here. That's why when I went to my sponsors, and thank God I had sponsors who knew what they were doing, I asked him what this one day at a time was. He said, it's simple. Today I went to a meeting. Today I prayed. Today I meditated. Today I took inventory. And today I worked another alcoholic. So you say that at the end of the day, you'll be in God's pocket. You quit worrying about any of this stuff. You'll be perfectly armored. Alcohol will not be able to lay a glove on you. You stop doing those things, and alcoholism is sitting right there on your shoulder, just waiting to take over. You can count on that too. They were right. I listened to them. I don't want to die right now. I'm getting up pretty close, I guess. Maybe I got another 10 years, 12 years. I don't know what I got. Doesn't really matter. But every day I learned that every day is a day I'm not willing to flush down the toilet. There's much more in this paragraph than the 10th step. 10th step constitutes about 7 lines. The rest of the paragraph is quite instructive in other aspects. Let's start out. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any mistakes as we go along. Now, take the word continue and ask yourself, what does that mean? What does that refer to? Continue from what? Well, obviously the fourth step, right? What else have we done that would be recognizable as an inventory? So we're going to continue the efforts that we started in our fourth step. The fourth step was taken how? In our heads? No, we wrote it down. We already found out that we take inventory in writing. We don't try to take inventory in our heads. Some people may be genius enough to do that, but by and large, most of us are incapable of doing that over any length of time. So we get a notebook, just a little book like this. Mine's kind of been used, as you can see. And when something comes up during the day, we write it down. Doesn't have to be more than 2 or 3 words. Something to get out of my head and get it down on paper. Now I can deal with it. Continue to take personal inventory. And continue to set right any mistakes as we go along. That's a continuation of the fourth and of the eighth and ninth steps, isn't it? So now we thought we were through making amends. No. We just learned how. Being human beings who are living in the real world most of the time, hopefully, we're going to find that we step on people's toes occasionally. We react badly occasionally. And we need to make amends quickly. We need to use our tools of our eighth and ninth step. Why? Wouldn't it be kind of nice if we could stop doing that stuff? Just flail around like a bull in a china shop for a while without having to feel guilty about it? Well, that would be great, except we do feel guilty. And guilt blocks us from God. So we've got to be sure that we stay free of guilt. And to do that, it's critically important for us to be willing to make amends. So this sets the stage. Continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. Now this next sentence tells us when we start doing this. Remember that the step which came just before this was the ninth step, in which we were busy making amends, trying to set matters straight. But we also found out that in the process of making amends in the ninth step can take the rest of our lives in some cases. And there are many people we may not be able to find now. In other words, it is not possible in most cases to complete our amends in any reasonable period of time. And we have to make sure that we accommodate the 12 steps to that very fact, and that's what the steps have done. When do we start working our 10th step? Here's what it says. We vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. The word as means during the time that we are cleaning up the past, we go to our 10th step and begin living the 10th step and the 11th step and the 12th step. That's what it means. As a practical matter, it's probably good practice to make several amends and then get your sponsor to sit down with you and go over the 10th and 11th steps and show you how to work them, and then get busy doing it. We would want to cut our teeth on making amends before we launch into the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps. But we're going to do that very thing as we clean up the past. We may be making these amends for a long time, but we sure as heck aren't going to sit around waiting to do those 3 vital steps which keep us growing spiritually until whatever amends we have to make are finished. No, we don't do that. The big book and the steps do not require us that we do something foolish, or in many cases impossible. So we commence this way of living. Please notice that phrase, this way of living. The spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. That's what that means. This way of living refers to these 10th, 11th, and 12th steps. These are the only steps we need, because they incorporate within them all the other steps. And they look forward, they don't look backward. And if we take inventory every day, we never have to take another inventory the rest of our lives in the fourth step sense, because nothing ever gets ahead of us. We always know what our present reality is. We've been writing it down every day. If you're keeping a journal, you can go back to your journal, you'll see your Pilgrim's Progress as it goes all the way through your life in sobriety. It's all there. If you are staying honest, if you are doing the work thoroughly, if you're answering the questions honestly and thoroughly, you will find that nothing ever gets ahead of you. You always know what's going on. And now we've done the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th steps. And what's happened? We have entered the world of the Spirit. We're no longer blocked. This is where we have to be, free of the things which block us from God. If we wish to recover, we have to make sure that the door is always open. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Did you ever stop to wonder what those two words mean in this paragraph and in this context? Understanding of what? Effectiveness in what pursuit? If you think about it, the answer is obvious. Where do we see the word understanding or understand? We see it in the steps, don't we? God of my understanding, God as we understood Him. This means precisely that we're to grow in our understanding of God. And we're going to do that through the practice of the 10th and 11th and 12th steps. I believe it was Henry Ford who said, "When I hear it, I'm interested. When I see it, I believe it. When I experience it, I understand it." This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Whoa, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that I'm going to have to continue to do this stuff the rest of my life? I don't get to have a quick and dirty fix here, finish the 12 steps. You know, you always hear around the rooms, well, you can chair a meeting when you finish the 12 steps. Stop and think about it. There's no such thing as finish the 12 steps. Practice these principles in all of our affairs tells us exactly the opposite, doesn't it? We're never finished with them. Any more than if you were a Cadillac repairman, a mechanic in the back there in the Cadillac garage, and they had taught you how to use all the tools in the Cadillac garage. Could you then say, "I'm finished with the tools"? No, you're just beginning. You learn how to use them. Now start fixing Cadillacs, dummy. Continue to watch for. Continue to watch means to continue to take inventory of what? Oh gosh, our old friends. Selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. The 4 cardinal defects. The same ones we found when we did our 4th step. They haven't changed. We've gone from the 4th to the 10th step, and we find the same rascals are sitting right here, coming back to bite us, because fear has come back, and we have to be able to deal with this every day. We're going to continue to watch, which means continue to inventory, write it down: selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Do we have any more evidence that these are the 4 cardinal defects? Certainly. Turn the page over to page 86. First full paragraph. We're now in step 11. We're now looking at the first full paragraph at the 11th step inventory. What are the first 4 questions? Today was I resentful? Today was I selfish? Today was I dishonest? Today was I afraid? Same 4 defects. Same things we found in the 4th step. They're repeated in the 10th step and again in the 11th step. Why? Because that's the way the 12 steps work. You say, well, wait a minute. Where in the heck are all of these 7 deadly sins? They're not there. Sin isn't any part of the AA program. It may be in some of our literature, influenced by various ecclesiastics, one in particular who had a lot of influence, but it's not in the big book. And sin cannot be a part of AA anyhow, because sin is as defined religiosity. And we don't practice religion here. Now there are plenty of people in AA who do recognize sin as they are taught in their respective churches, and that's fine. That's wonderful. But for AA, we look at something entirely different from sin. It may very well be that our actions have been sinful, but we're not looking here at that. We're looking here at twisted minds. We're looking at God-given natural instincts, which have been warped and perverted by fear. The instincts for sex and security and society. And because these things are instinctual, they operate below the level of conscious thought. Therefore, we have no power over them. It is instinctual for me to wish to be accepted by my group. It's instinctual for me to wish not to be shunned. It's instinctual for me to wish to be thought highly of and thought kindly of and accepted and included in instead of pushed out. It's a powerful instinct, the instinct for society. But it doesn't require that I think about it at all. It's just there. And that's the lizard brain we're talking about. This is back in the medulla oblongata. Came out of the primordial ooze. This stuff is so ancient and so powerful, and it is not amenable to our upper brain functions. We can't think our way out of it. Think about the sex instinct. Is that not lizard brain? Do you have to stop and think, "Ooh, golly, I'm really attracted to him. Maybe I better get sexually aroused. Ooh, now I'm going to get sexually aroused." And then we push certain buttons in our heads and our sexual arousal starts. No, that happens. It happens because it's instinctual. We don't control it. It's just as silly for me to say to Doc over there, "Doc, don't drink," as for Doc to say to me, "Jim, stop getting those wild sexual daydreams about that beautiful woman." I can't any more help that than he can help drinking. I got to have help with my instincts that have gone screwy. They're goofy. They're crazy. My mind is out of control. That's why we say when we come in here, we're nuts. We are. Our natural instincts have been warped and perverted by fear, so they no longer work as God intended. We are not rational about this stuff. We cannot be rational. That's why we have no power over these defects, because they don't operate in the realm in which our power would be effective. That's why we have to have God's help with them, because they are beyond our reach. And when it says that we're going to be restored to sanity, and we will be, this means that God has put those natural instincts back into order, where they're supposed to be. And only He can do that. We can't. And no damn psychiatrist or psychologist or facilitator or a bunch of pills or electroshock therapy is going to do it either. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. Wow, that's right to the 7th step, isn't it? We wrote them down, and now we're asking God to take them away. We discuss them with somebody immediately. Oh, there's the 5th step. So we write it down, we talk to somebody about it, and we ask God to take it away. And then we make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. There's the 9th step. All this is happening as we're going through the day. You say, well, wait a minute. I'm at work, I'm in the middle of a computer program, or I'm trying to build a house, or whatever it is. How am I supposed to tell somebody about this immediately? How am I supposed to find time to write it down? How long does it take to write down, Jim made me mad? What? 10 seconds? How long does it take to say to God, God, please take away this resentment of Jim, and then get back to work? How long does it take? Do you ever stop to take care of bodily functions, which can be usually done in private? There's time. See, we like to give ourselves excuses why we don't do this stuff. Many of us are very, very, very loath to write anyway. We just don't want to do it. We're not used to it. We don't want to do it. We have to force ourselves to do it. So now we have seen the 4th step, 5th step, 7th step, and 9th step, all included here in the 10th step. And then what else? Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. The 12th step. Now, why would we do that? Well, there are all kinds of clues, but let's find one of them that sticks in mind particularly. Go back to page 70. All right, here's one of the most difficult things we all face in recovery, and that's our sex life, our sex inventory, and our sex life, and our relationship life. Nothing causes more difficulty in recovery in AA than boy-girl problems. Count on it. Relationships, just because they distract us from our recovery, they involve such violent human emotions, jealousy, the most terrible human emotion, feelings of rejection, feelings of shame, guilt, remorse, all that stuff, and they pile in on us. And if we're not taking good care of them and taking care of ourselves, they pile down to a point where they become insupportable. Now, we do have a solution, but you see, again, it's important for us to be willing to use it. In the second full paragraph, a little over halfway down the page, if sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. Why? Because this takes us out of ourselves. See, the problem is always self. It quiets the imperious urge, when to yield would mean heartache. The imperious urge means just what we were talking about a few minutes ago. This powerful human, natural God-given instinct for sex. It's much stronger than we are. The imperious urge, the imperium, imperial Rome. This business of helping others constitutes one of 3 tools that we're given to stay out of self. And we have to do that. Let's go back to basics again. What do we learn back there in the 3rd step? Our problems, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though she usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we have to be rid of self and selfishness. We have to, or it kills us. Because it blocks us from God. You see, if we don't have God in our lives, we can't stop drinking. If we can't stop drinking, we're going to die. It's a straight line proposition again, isn't it? And self and selfishness and self-centeredness and self-pity and self-delusion block us from God. Now, we can't get rid of self on our own. We need His help. But if we invoke God's help, He does help us. And we are able to get rid of self. But we're given 3 tools to use as we go through the rest of our lives. 1, as we go through each day, we do what Bill said we must do. We turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. This means as we go through the day, we constantly remind ourselves that we're not running the show. God, what do you want me to do next? What's my next step to be? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are thoughts, the big book says, which must go with us constantly. The proper use of our willpower is to make ourselves, to will ourselves, to take this action of surrender. God, what do you want me to do next? When we do that, we are filled with a peace and serenity that we never had before, because we're putting the results in God's hands, and we are offering to do those things which He wants us to do, to follow directions, to be obedient. So, as we do that, we go through each day with that prayer. Secondly, we stay out of self as we meditate. Meditation is surrender. Nobody gets left behind who doesn't want to be. And finally, this really, really, really important final sentence of 8 words. Love and tolerance of others is our code. Now, code is not an, oh golly gee whiz, it would be sort of nice if we kind of did it. It's a rule. It's a very powerful rule. Code. Love and tolerance of others are code. Now, this does not mean an attitude of love or an attitude of tolerance. It means being loving and being tolerant, acting with love, acting with tolerance. And we do that even though we don't feel like it, even though we don't want to do it, even though we can argue that this person doesn't deserve it. We still do it. Because thought follows action. If you want to eventually end up loving the person you used to hate, you pray for them and you treat them with loving kindness, and you'll find that you eventually come to love them. Perhaps not as a human, but at least with God's love. Because remember, we're trying here to emulate God's love for all men and women. So we have ceased fighting anything or anyone. We've given up the idea that we can tough it out. White-knuckle sobriety is sobriety in name only. What it really is untreated alcoholism. So, for by this time sanity will have returned. Aha, so remember back there in the second step where we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. The beliefs did not necessarily extend to a belief that God would restore us to sanity, only that He could. In other words, at the second step, we granted God the power to do this. We weren't perhaps yet sure that He would do it for us. But it didn't matter, because at that stage of our spiritual development, it was only necessary to grant Him the power to do so. Well, that promise has come true. For by this time sanity will have returned, by the time we reach the 10th step. And we will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. I've heard a lot of people recently talking about this, and they all have in different words and different contexts, but it all boils down to the same thing. With the protection of the steps and with God's protection, the strongest impulses and temptations to drink or drug have been resisted. There was something there which was stronger than the obsession, compulsion to drink or use. Well, why are we not surprised? This is exactly what it's telling us here. That we recoil from it as from a hot flame. And we react sanely and normally. And we will find that this has happened automatically. And boy, is that ever important. That word automatically got to ring heavily with us. Yes?
Jim, can you just tell me another word for deity when you use that in that context? Because I don't know what that word is.
Well, deity is a supernatural being, not human, in 1,000 different contexts, but it has nothing to do with human beings or anything on the.
You're talking God when you said that word, right?
Generically, yes. It might be a pantheistic god, some Diana or Thor or something like that. If anybody is in here who believes in Thor or Diana, God bless them. As long as they're willing to surrender to a higher power, it seems to work. I don't think God really cares what we call him. That's just my opinion. What the main thing is that we don't dictate here how one should believe. But we do say that one must believe in something. It's the only thing we found that works. And we also found that if people stick around, they come around and then they come around. And it happens. Why, I don't know, but people who stick it out almost always come to some kind of a belief system. Once in a while, like the free thinkers, you'll find people who want to talk about their better self. And that's fine too. I like to talk to them because I like to point out that what we recognize probably is the same thing as they do. That we're going to find God deep down inside ourselves. You call it your better self, I call it God. What's the difference? Maybe there is none. I don't know. So up to this point, we know we've entered the world of spirit and we've been restored to sanity. We'll see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. In other words, what that's saying is we aren't struggling against liquor. We're not struggling against liquor or drugs or anything else. We're seeking God. We're seeking to be set free from those things in ourselves which block us from him. We're seeking to reach a place of surrender. We're letting God do his work. We're not without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. Whoa, wait a minute. Isn't that one of the main things we supposedly learn? If you go into a barber shop, you're going to get a haircut, which I need to do.
May I say something?
Yes, of course. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. Man, we're in God's pocket. Nothing's going to get to us as long as we stay there. Besides which, we've not even sworn off. Nowhere in the big book does it say, swear off drinking, go on the wagon, take the pledge. Why would you tell somebody who could never live up to that to do it? Don't drink and go to meetings. One of the worst messages anybody ever hears who walks in that door new. The implication being that if I go to meetings and don't drink, I'm going to be just fine. Well, certainly. But there's the rub. How can you possibly tell somebody who can't not drink, don't drink? How can you possibly say to somebody you have just told you are powerless over alcohol, you can't stop drinking on your own, but by the way, don't drink? How ridiculous is that? Well, the big book is never ridiculous. It doesn't involve itself in anything like that. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Why in the world is that important? Well, the next paragraph tells us. Now, this next paragraph is going to tell us what we need to do. We found out where we've come to. We have been relieved of the obsession compulsion to drink. Problem's been solved. Now, what do we need to do about it? Well, it's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. Does anybody know what resting on our laurels means? It's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. This means we've come this far. We've been restored to sanity. We've entered the world of spirit. We're starting to get God conscious. We got all this good stuff going for us. People are starting to ask us for help and ask us our opinions, and my gosh, this is wonderful. I'm a winner. I got this laurel wreath here. I don't have to do anything more. So I'm going to let up on my spiritual program of action. I'm going to say, the heck with this business of having to do this stuff every day. My friends tell me that I'm becoming an AA junkie, and I'm going to do everything it takes to balance my life, which means precisely that I'm going back on my promise to God. I asked Him to take my life and my will in His hands. I offered that to Him. What am I doing now? I'm saying, well, I didn't really mean it. I'm going to balance my life. To hell with you. I mean, you can ask what you want of me, but if it's not convenient, I ain't going to do it. If it means I have to get up early and go and stay late, if it means I have to take my weekends when I'd rather be playing golf, out fishing, or just laying around watching TV, I ain't going to do that. I'm going to balance my life. And also there's people in my life who want me around. And they are making all kinds of nasty noises because they don't see enough of me. They're demanding more of my time. They're distracting me from recovery. But that's okay, because I really like to have the excuse not to have to mess with this stuff so much. I think I will only go to as many meetings as I need. I see if I can work it back down to about one a month. And then they'll be lucky to see me. That's the portrait of a dead duck. Guaranteed. There are exceptions, but let's examine those exceptions. These are people who are here and are welcome to be here. They have a desire to stop drinking, but they're not alcoholics. They're here because they were forced to come here, or because they just decided they wanted to come here. They got here and I loved the place. They got more going on here than they ever had in their life before, ever. They're going to stay around here for the rest of their lives. The Big Book identifies them as people who can stop or moderate at any time, given sufficient reason to do so. There are lots of people like that in AA. Many of them are extremely valuable members. Some of them are dangerous as hell. They'll claim 15, 20 years sobriety and tell us they never read the Big Book, they don't work the steps, they don't believe in the steps, all they do is just don't drink and go to meetings. And that's true, that's all they do. They're not under a sentence of death, you and I are. This doesn't make them second-class citizens, it just means that we have to be very careful to look to see who is making the grand pronouncements. Because we can fall off very easily if we begin to believe the easier, softer way. Nobody gets anything in here for nothing. And laying up on a spiritual program of action and resting our laurels is a formula for disaster for anybody who's a real alcoholic. That's guaranteed. And we're headed for trouble if we do. For alcohol is a subtle foe, and here's the truth: we are not cured of alcoholism. The disease is in remission, true enough, and it will remain that way so long as we remain spiritually fit, continuing to carry the message, continuing to return, as Albert Einstein said, as much as we have received. and are still receiving. Albert Einstein recognized the paradox: we keep absolutely nothing that we're not willing to give away. It's just the truth. A paradox doesn't sound like truth, does it? It sounds like something kind of weird and oddball and off the wall. It turns out that the very definition of paradox is a truth which does not appear to be real, but is nevertheless the truth. And so, what we really have is a daily reprieve, contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. There's the truth of it, and daily reprieve means exactly what it says. We don't build up any credit in heaven by doing good deeds today, not so far as alcoholism is concerned. Every day is a day when we must, as it tells us, carry a vision of God's will into all our activities. What's the 12th step say? Practice these principles in all my affairs. And so what we're really looking at here is again the truth. That the AA program is a program of daily application of certain principles which are stated as steps of action in the big book and on the walls of meeting rooms around the world. Every day is a day when we must carry a vision of God's will into all our activities. How did I get that vision if I didn't ask for it? And of course, if we pray and meditate in the morning, that's what we do. We ask God to show us what He wants as we go through the day. God, what do you want me to do next? What's my next step to be? Thy will, not mine, be done. What's so hard about that? That these are thoughts which must go with us constantly, that they're the proper use of our will. In other words, we will ourselves to turn our will over to God. The proper use of our will is to make ourselves do the right thing. And at first we have to do it that way because we are basically and naturally selfish and self-centered. We have to make ourselves do the right thing at first. Take inventory, pray, meditate, work with others, get to a meeting. After a while it becomes the way we live our lives. And then we wouldn't have it any other way. But at first, the application of our willpower to do the right thing, do the next right thing, do it now, no excuses, no foot dragging, just do it. That's critically important to long-term sobriety. Now finally, the last paragraph on page 85 is a paragraph of huge significance. Much has already been said, that's true, about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from Him who has all knowledge and power. It's important for us to understand what this is saying. Receiving, we're going to be given. We're getting these gifts. They will come to us. We don't earn them. We make ourselves available. We open ourselves up. We become willing to accept these gifts. Strength and inspiration and direction from Him who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us. There are a number of things here to consider. Carefully followed directions. What in the world is this? Everybody I hear these days talks about suggestions. To some extent, we have become God conscious. Conscious of the God within, conscious of the God of the universe, God conscious. Step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. And that sounds like a kind of obnoxious little sentence, doesn't it? But it's not at all. I mean, that sentence is loaded. It works. Let's take the middle part out. it works if we work at it. Now, what in the world does that mean? That means that we're going to be consciously using prayer in our daily life. This is part of us. This is part of the way we live our lives. And then we have to have the proper attitude. Go back to the promise. One of the promises, our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Attitude is something which we're really going to be looking at now, because when we get the 11th step, we're taking a PhD in recovery. Now we're getting up there where the nuts really crack, because we've gotten rid of the stuff that was blocking us off, and now we're going to learn how to stay in that state, if you will, a state of grace, a state of miracle, staying in God's pocket, staying nestled in His arms, staying spiritually fit, any way you want to put it. The proper attitude means simply that when I pray, I'm asking God to show me what He wants me to do and to give me the power to carry it out, and I mean it. Back in the 4th step, you may recall we were reading about this back there, where we get jammed up on the sex matter, some relationship problem. In our morning meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific problem. And what's the tagline? The right answer will come if we want it. See, there's the right attitude, the proper attitude. Not that I'm going through some kind of formula here, but that I'm actually asking God something which I intend to follow through on. And whatever the answer may be, I intend to accept the answer. That proper attitude. It's the attitude of surrender, isn't it? And humility, and attitude of gratitude, they say. Now, it would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. Now, this next paragraph is the 11th step inventory. Let's talk about this for a minute. Every day is a day when we must carry a vision of God's will into all our activities. How did I get that vision if I didn't ask for it? And of course, if we pray and meditate in the morning, that's what we do. We ask God to show us what He wants as we go through the day. God, what do you want me to do next? What's my next step to be? Thy will, not mine, be done. What's so hard about that? That these are thoughts which must go with us constantly, that they're the proper use of our will. In other words, we will ourselves to turn our will over to God. The proper use of our will is to make ourselves do the right thing. And at first we have to do it that way because we are basically and naturally selfish and self-centered. We have to make ourselves do the right thing at first. Take inventory, pray, meditate, work with others, get to a meeting. After a while, it becomes the way we live our lives. And then we wouldn't have it any other way. But at first, the application of our willpower to do the right thing, do the next right thing, do it now, no excuses, no foot dragging, just do it. That's critically important to long-term sobriety. Now finally, the last paragraph on page 85 is a paragraph of huge significance. Much has already been said, that's true, about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from Him who has all knowledge and power. It's important for us to understand what this is saying. Receiving, we're going to be given. We're getting these